Welcome to Beyond Sports with Paul and Jeremy. Today, what are we going to be discussing, Jeremy?
This is a topic that I've really wanted to get into for a while now. This is the Forbes list of the highest paid athletes. We'll say the highest paid athletes of the year 2019 through 2020. And we can take a look at this, and this will give us an idea of kind of how the highest earning athletes make their money. And we can see what are the secrets, what are they doing? How can the general athlete who might not be as high earning get onto this list, or how can he or she increase their earnings? So it's kind of, something we've talked about. Where does the money really come from? How do you really become a profitable athlete? So that's kind of what I wanted to get into with this Forbes list.
Yeah, definitely. I think we talked a lot about different things, a lot of athletes that have made a lot of money over the years and not even knowing. One of the things that we talked about was Dak Prescott, I think, when we were talking about his initial podcast and about his contract issue. And then you were like, Dak actually has a lot of money, right? And I think that this show will kind of help out and show why Dak's contract, even though it's very important for him to get, why it's not hurting him financially, right? And I think that's a really cool kind of thing to look at. Maybe not necessarily Dak, but how other players have how they make money as well.
Yeah, so I have this list that I've compiled. So the Forbes list itself is not as easy to access as what I've done. I've actually taken the top 20 athletes and I put them into a table, and I put that on our website, our blog. So check out our blog, see if you can see the full list for yourself as I've kind of made it. I have it by the rank number, the name of the athlete, sport that they play, country they're from, their total compensation, and then that's divided into two other columns of salary and endorsements. Then I made a notes column that kind of gives you an idea of who they endorse for or how they've made the majority of their money. And so they say that the salary and the endorsements, they get these numbers off of kind of insiders. So, Forbes has to offer you some sort of something that they can only do, and that's they have people that can get these money numbers and endorsement numbers. So they have insiders. That's their value that they bring to the consumer.
Yeah.
So they know these things. They can estimate these things. And, we don't necessarily know these ourselves. So it's nice to have some sort of resource for that.
Exactly.
Some of the methodology they say, just to get really quick into it, they actually reduced the NBA salaries by 25% based on the estimated maximum salary cut. And some of the other things like golfers, their golfers' income includes course design work, which is something I didn't realize. So they have other streams of income. So a golfer can design golf courses and turn that into another stream of income, and we'll get into that later also.
Nice.
But yeah, I think that's kind of the most part that we need to talk about for the methodology. So
sounds good. We
can get a little bit into the numbers now. All right, so the number one highest paid athlete, we'll just start from the top. This is like the opposite of suspenseful, right? So we'll just get right to the number one. Number one for 2019 through 2020 is Roger Federer. Of course, he's a Swiss tennis player. His total was $106 million. And I'll get into the endorsements versus salary actually later. I figure we'll just go through. Number two, Cristiano Ronaldo, soccer player, Portuguese, and his total is $105 million. Lionel Messi is number three, soccer player from Argentina, and he has a total of $104 million. So you see at the top there, give or take $1 million here, $1 million there. So these are all estimated. Neymar is number four. This is where there's actually a big drop. His total compensation is $95.5 million. And of course, he's a soccer player from Brazil. We get our first American athlete at number five, LeBron James, with $88.2 million total compensation. Then Steph Curry at $74.4 is number six. Number seven, Kevin Durant at $63.9. And then Tiger Woods at $62.3 is number eight. Our first football player is at number nine. It's Kirk Cousins at $60.5 million. And then Carson Wentz at $59.1. And I can stop there at the top 10. And we could talk a little bit about the top 10 if you'd like. So in the top 10, we have number 9, number 10 are actually American football players, quarterbacks. Number 8, Tiger Woods, a golfer. Numbers 5, 6, and 7 are basketball players. And then the top 3 of the top 4 are soccer players, where the number 1 is a tennis player. So what are your initial thoughts about this list?
These guys are making a lot of money. That's one of the first things that I thought about, right? But there's so many different things that I thought were interesting about this list. One of the things that I'll point out is, first of all, Roger Federer dominant, right? Like in this realm, right? If you just think about what Federer does, right? His total of amount of income, right, in this sense for this year was 106 million. We'll just say 106, forget the 0.3 for now, right? 106 million. He made that 6 million from salary and the rest was endorsements, right? So that is amazing because if you think about tennis players, how many other tennis players are on this list?
In the top 20, there are none.
Yeah, in the top 20, there's none, right? And then the next two that come up are who?
Naomi Osaka at 29 and Serena Williams at 31.
Wow. And that's really interesting because if you think about it, it shows that for tennis players, right? And I think this is one of the things that we're going to start to get into with that discussion is that your salary might not be that much, but the marketability of tennis is really high. If you're a good athlete, you can make a lot of money just off of your marketability, right? When you're talking about Serena and Naomi, they both made 34 million off of endorsements, right? Which is higher than most other athletes, right? Like higher than everybody outside of the top 8 players, you know? So I think that's really, really kind of interesting. That's one of the things that stood out for me. And then I think that also when you look at it, those top 3 of those top 4 being kind of like that soccer player, it also shows how soccer is just, if you're a really good soccer player, you're basically set because you're going to get a really high salary and you don't even have to worry about the endorsements, which is probably a little bit harder for a soccer player if you think about it, because a lot more matches, a lot more involvement, a lot more this practice with the international friendlies, the going around, the traveling all the time for these compared to maybe the tennis matches. You still have that practice, but you don't have these big matches as often. So maybe that's one of those things as well. But again, I think that those two things really stood out to me. And then I also like the basketball part. I was kind of surprised that Steph was so close to LeBron, but I thought that it was interesting to see that his Callaway golf thing was one of the things, right? And it kind of like, oh, well, we're talking about golfers now, right? And he comes in before like Tiger Woods, which is actually kind of interesting. So that's some of my first general things, and then that's the top 8 type thing. And then the American football. I haven't got down to that yet. We can talk a little bit more about that as well. But that's some of the things that really stood out for me the first time that I saw this graph, and then just looking back at it right now and bringing some of that stuff forward.
Yeah, so I think number 1, Roger Federer. Oh, let me correct myself really quick. Serena is number 33, not number 31. But going back to Roger Federer, like you said, $106 million total that he earned in 2019 through 2020. $6 million in salary. And if you watch tennis, you know Roger Federer has been hurt the last year, basically, on and off. He's not been playing. When he plays well because he's just that good that he can still dominate through his guile and his ability to outthink these young guys. And he's just greatness personified on the tennis court. But he hasn't been winning that much because he hasn't been playing that much. He still made $6 million, which is good. However, now we look at where his real money comes from. $100 million in endorsements, which is just crazy for one given year. And in the notes section, I have what he's been endorsing. So the biggest one, as far as I can tell, is this 10-year, $300 million deal with Uniqlo, which is a Japanese clothing brand. And I think Kei Nishikori, the Japanese tennis player, also has a pretty good deal with Uniqlo. And so that's $30 million a year. $30 million a year for Federer to wear Uniqlo brand. So that's a great deal. If you can get $30 million a year, that's what the highest NFL players are making right now to play sports. That's not for just to wear some clothes, right? He's just like, hey, look, I will wear your shirts, I will wear your shorts. And they don't even have shoes. He's just wearing their clothes for $30 million a year. That's great to be that good that you can just put on the clothes and get that much money. He also has one with the Pasta Barilla. So you see one of his coaches always has like that Pasta Barilla thing, or Pasta Barilla, however they pronounce it. It's always, he's got that hat on.
Barilla.
Credit Suisse Group. So that's money, Switzerland money, Mercedes-Benz. So, the high-level brands. Mercedes-Benz is giving him money. Rolex. I already have Uniqlo in there, and then Wilson. So, he's got a lot of tennis rackets through Wilson. So, he's their kind of their tennis racket guy. But these are a lot of really nice high-end brands. You know what I'm saying? He's kind of established himself as kind of a high-end, elegant guy, right? And so it pays off with the type of endorsements he's getting. And when you're in an individual sport like tennis and you thrive and you're one of the best players, you get so much recognition and notoriety that it's really easy for a brand to want to come to you and have you endorse their products because they know you're in the spotlight. You're solely in the spotlight.
Yeah, and it's kind of like Roger Federer. If you think about it, I'm trying to think about so before Federer, who are some of the top guys that you remember from tennis that were just always in the media?
Well, Pete Sampras was probably
exactly
before him, like the guy, and then Andre Agassi.
Yeah, right. And if you think about the difference, right, with those three guys, right, you had Agassi that was more of a kind of like a wilder type of guy, right? Maybe Sampras was more of a chill, kind of like into himself type guy. And Federer's more like a proper, like, I don't know, like elegant type of guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think that that's one of the interesting points is that at that point in time, when you see tennis, it's always on a national stage because the Masters, these big things that you see, they only happen at certain times and everybody kind of tunes into them. And they're not necessarily just one day events, right? They go over multiple days. And because of that, and because Federer was so dominant and he embodied elegance, he was able to like get a lot of these deals, you know what I mean? And the 10-year deal, that means that it probably happened a while ago, you know what I mean? I don't know, when was that deal? When did that deal start?
It happened like 3 or 4 years ago. Basically, he was already toward retirement when he signed the deal. And he's going to be endorsing it after he retires. Yeah,
so with him, it's kind of like the other things that he had, like the Swiss stuff, the Benz, the Rolex, right? Like that stuff was there, and it kind of established, hey, this is the athlete that you want to go for, like elegant type of things, right? And then I think as that developed, more and more people that wanted elegant types of athletes to market their business, maybe they looked at like Roger Federer because of what he was actually able to show, and because he was such a well-known name. Like everybody knows Federer. You know, like some people don't know who Messi is. Some people don't know who Ronaldo is. Some people don't know who Neymar is, especially in the U.S. But I feel like most people in the U.S. know who Roger Federer is, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that helps us establish his marketability because it's not necessarily just in Europe or America, right? You see that it's also in Asia as well. And that shows why he's such a good person to have as an endorsement of, or as a person that's endorsing your products, you know? So
that's a really good point because he is a global brand. Like tennis goes around the globe. You know, they're about to have the Australian Open, so that's Australia. Then they come to America for a few tournaments. There's the U.S. Open, obviously, in the later part of the year. Mm-hmm. A lot of tournaments in Europe because tennis is huge in Europe. But it's a global sport. And so a person who's good at it becomes a global ambassador. So that's a really good point that even if he were, say, just in Europe, he'd be big. But the fact that he goes all around the world, he's even that much bigger. And I doubt that there's other athletes who can have that sort of global appeal, like you said, just based on that. Because even soccer in America isn't as big, but I'm sure there are a lot of people who know tennis. And because tennis is still a sport that a lot of people do play, there's a major tennis tournament, whereas English Premier League or, you know, or the Italian Serie A or whatever, all that stuff is strictly in Europe. And it's hard for people to really get into it as much as, say, tennis when the U.S. Open is on every year. Yeah. So that's a really good point. The same thing with Serena. So the reason that I put Serena on here and I put Naomi Osaka up here to get into the tennis player stuff really quick is just that the same type of thing because, again, these are individual athletes who succeed and are recognized accordingly. So to start with Serena, Serena is one of the most accomplished tennis players ever, right? Just there's no arguing that. Whether you say she's the greatest ever, whatever that word can mean anything, but she's definitely one of the most accomplished. When we look at her earnings, out of the 36 million that she earned, according to this report, only 2 of it was from salary. Again, Serena has not been having a great last couple years, really. She's been doing well. She's been getting to the finals of major tournaments, but then she's not been able to win those tournaments. If she wins one more, she'll have the record, or tie the record at least, for the most major tournaments for a woman in the Open era, or for anyone in the Open era. So I think there's a lot of pressure that she's feeling when she gets in those majors, because she's made a few major finals. She's that good that she can get there. And then she's been losing to a lot of young, really good players, because I think she's just probably being overcome by the moment with such a historic moment. Either way, Serena, you see her on your TV all the time now. I've seen her on the Bolt 24 commercial. I've seen her for a migraine medicine. I've seen her at Walmart for secret deodorant. She has more than a dozen corporate partners, according to this. One of those being Audemars Piguet and Piguet or whatever. Rappers love to talk about AP watches, right? She does Beats. She's endorsing for Bumble, apparently, which is kind of cool. Gatorade, that's that Bolt 24, I assume.
Yeah.
JP Morgan Chase. I've seen her do some JP Morgan Chase commercials. Nike, Upper Deck, and Wilson. She has tennis rackets with Wilson as well. She's always on the TV, right? Serena is always on the TV. So she understands Serena is a brand. You don't have to say the last name, because we all know. And she's making the most out of it. Because whether or not she plays tennis ever again, she's always going to be Serena. And she's always got that power to make money off the playing field. So $34 million, definitely reproducible. Definitely she can keep doing that.
Exactly.
She invests in female-run startups, too. So she's trying to give back and help other people succeed off of her success.
Yeah.
And then Osaka, there's this thing about being the best player in Japan that somehow just generates money. Naomi Osaka, $37.4 million, 3.4 of which was from prize money. So she had a more successful career, or more successful season on the field, on the court, than Serena did, but the same amount of endorsements, 34 million in endorsements also. And she also has probably more than a dozen corporate partners as well. But there's this thing about being the most accomplished, best player in Japan that gets you money. As I talked about Kei Nishikori, Japanese men's player, he made the final of the US Open in 2014, I think. And he was one of the most highly paid athletes that year, and he continues to be, because he's the best player in Japan. And he gets so many endorsements in Japan. He did Uniqlo as well. And so he's pretty set based on endorsements, because he's a good player in Japan, where if you're good in Japan, they really back you. So the number one tennis player gets crazy endorsements. And that's what you see with Naomi Osaka. Hers are All Nippon Airways, so she's doing, so the airlines there, Body Armor, MasterCard, Nike, Nissan Motor, Nissan Foods. So a couple of, I've already named just a couple of Japanese companies, Procter & Gamble, Shiseido, and Yonex, which is, I think Yonex is, tennis rackets too. But she's got a lot of just Japanese companies. She's a Japanese player. So when you're the number one player in Japan, male or female, you get those endorsement opportunities, and she's also taken advantage. She's been the highest paid female athlete, I think, for the past 2 years, maybe. I think it's been a while, yeah. So she's really taken advantage of her success on the court and translating it to success off the court. So I think that's super cool too. Yeah,
2 points to add to that. I think that is really cool that not only are they athletes, but they're female athletes that are endorsing maybe brands that people would think about with respect to men, right? Like this Body Armor, right? Or Nissan Motor, you know what I mean? Like, that's not something that probably would have happened 20, 30 years ago, Yeah. And I think that's pretty cool. And I think that Serena may have helped partially open up the doors, you know what I mean, for a lot of other young tennis players, especially female, to get some of these opportunities. And I think, like you said, Bumble, like, who knows, right? Like, Serena's doing Bumble now.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Didn't know it either. Another part, and I know we might get a little bit more into this later, but I thought this was an interesting point, because I didn't think about it until you kind of brought that up. And you were saying that Serena Williams, that 34 million in endorsements, this seems like something that can continue into the future, right? And one of the things that I was thinking about in addition, especially, is that for these individual sports, I wonder and I think, but I'm not, it's a wonder think, I guess. I don't know what it is. But is one of the reasons why Federer, why he's able to continue that endorsement type of situation into the future, is because he ended on top, right? In a sense, right? So if you're in an individual sport and you don't end your career on top or like near the top, right? Like I'll say his career's ended if it's not necessarily that way, right? But you have to have a really good presence at the end to continue those endorsements, right? Say if you won a lot and then you start to like slack off and you start to lose more and more and more, then your endorsements may not necessarily be as important. So I think that's one of the things that I thought was kind of cool, because there's a lot of athletes that have gotten endorsements, right? Because endorsements are a much bigger part of today's sports, and then some of them don't necessarily do as well later on. Anthony Joshua, but Conor McGregor. But yeah, so just kind of like thinking about some of those things as well was one of the things that was definitely interesting to me in that discussion. So
yeah, I think that's a good point, because success on the court breeds success off the court. So you need to be successful, and if you're not, you just need to take what you can get. Honestly, right? Like if you can endorse for something, then you should take that endorsement because it's extra income. But you can always upgrade, basically, if you're more successful, right? You can then start to change who you endorse because you have more opportunities, you have more leverage to do that.
Yeah.
All right, and so numbers 2, 3, and 4, I talked about all soccer players. And I find this interesting because, like I said before, I think that Europe kind of moves as a unit. I said this in our last spontaneous reaction, that I think Europe kind of moves as one unit in a sense. So European soccer players, the very best, can get a lot of money. And what they're getting is actually salary money, though. So Cristiano Ronaldo made 60 million in salary and 45 million in endorsements. Both are very big numbers, right? 45 million is nothing to sniff at. And so Lionel Messi made 72 million in salary and 32 in endorsements. Neymar 70.5 in salary and 25 in endorsements. So these guys are all making over $60 million in salary. So Cristiano Ronaldo's deal is supposedly 4 years worth $64 million annually. Lionel Messi is supposedly making $80 million annually in his salary. And Neymar is making $70 million annually, 7-0. So we talked about this in our episode with John on Major League Soccer. So check that out. And we talked about how the salary cap kind of can change how teams operate. And what you're seeing in the soccer, European soccer model, there is no cap. So when they really want a player, they're willing to pay that player whatever it takes. You will not see an NBA player making $60 million a year in salary until something majorly changes, right? There's no way. But these guys, because they're so good, they're making just uncapped amounts of salary, and that's their true worth. That's their market price. That's what their true value is. We're seeing based on competition and not having a salary cap. So while the best players go to the best teams who can afford it, the worst teams probably aren't doing as well. It's just, hey, that's life. That's capitalism. And then they also have endorsements to supplement their ridiculously high salaries that they've earned. I think it's just amazing to me to see. That was what I took out of those number 2, 3, and 4. Is the salary numbers are mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, right? Because you're talking about the cap system and not having one and how that affects it. And I think that, I don't know how many years ago, but there was something that was talking about the projection of LeBron James's actual value. And it may be something that you actually sent me a long time ago. But they're basically saying like his salary should have been somewhere closer to like 50 or 60 million with what he actually offers value wise to a team, right? Yeah. Will he ever get that? Probably not, right? But it's an interesting point because a little side note, and I'll come back, is that what would escalate these salaries up to that in the NBA? Well, if you keep having a bunch of players getting the max salary, Well, then what happens? Well, now you have to raise up the cap space or the cap limit for all the NBA, because teams aren't going to be able to get certain guys anymore, or they're not going to be able to pay them certain amounts, and that's just going to keep escalating where it gets higher and higher and higher. But to have a system where in soccer, these guys, again, we're talking about the top guys, right? Like, there's a lot of other guys that are making decent money, 17 million a year, 20 million a year, which is still huge numbers, and that's something that you see in soccer. But again, with these guys making that much, it's crazy how much they're bringing in per year. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's one of the keys, is that this is the amount per year. In athletics, it's weird. It's making people billionaires. You know what I mean? Like, it's making people billionaires. And it's interesting to see, because this transformation has happened in less than 100 years. You know what I mean? Think about like 1920s to now. You know what I mean? Like, athletes weren't making jack back then. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And just 100 years later, athletes are making $1 billion, right? So it's not even that it's $1 billion business. The athletes are billionaires. And I think that's an interesting point to kind of like think about, especially with soccer, and thinking about these guys come from all over, right? Neymar is from Brazil, right? And you could imagine Neymar probably didn't grow up necessarily with, I'm not sure, but I think that when I saw something about Neymar, he didn't grow up with a bunch of like rich parents or anything like that. You know what I mean? And if that is correct, my memory's correct, right? It just kind of shows like he basically went from nothing to a billionaire with soccer. If you see that as a kid, you're going to be like, I want to play soccer. Neymar did that. He's making money. These other guys are making 17 million a year just by that, and I think that that's really, really an interesting point, especially with the soccer part. So I'll leave that there. But I do think that it's crazy how much these guys are able to pull in by salary, and how it's more than doubling, more than tripling their endorsements at sometimes.
Yeah. The thing about the NBA salary cap, it has to do with the value of the league, right? So however much money the league pulls in, then you have to allocate a percentage of that to salaries, and then you divide that by the number of teams or whatever. That's how you get the salary cap. So that's why, the salary cap has been fluctuating up and down recently based on basically TV contracts and things, right? So we've got these supermax contracts and all that stuff where you can allocate like 40% to one player. But if the TV contracts go down, then the salary cap goes down. If the total amount of revenue goes down, then the salary cap goes down. So while players could conceivably make a lot more money than they're making now, that money has to come from somewhere, right? It has to come from somewhere to increase the value of the league. Whereas what we're seeing with those guys making $70 million a year, it has nothing to do with the league necessarily, and all to do with them as players, which is super cool. I think that's great. And so going on to the basketball thing, like I said, we had the 5, 6, and 7 were all basketball players. LeBron at 5, Steph Curry at 6, and Kevin Durant at 7. And what we see is that LeBron, out of all of them, is the king of endorsements. And of course he is, because you see him on commercials all the time too. So he made $28.2 million in salary and $60 million in endorsements. And some people he endorses for are 2K Sports, AT&T, Beats Electronic, Coca-Cola, which he has since switched to Pepsi, I believe, GMC, Kia Motors, so 2 different motor companies, Nike, Rimowa, which I don't know, I have to look that up, and then Walmart. He's just all over the place in terms of, like, he's got his hands in everything because he's been able to diversify, basically. Because basketball is a global brand. Like we talked about tennis players being global, basketball has really expanded globally. It's big in Europe. It's big in China. It's big in, I think, Australia, too. There are certain, English-speaking countries, definitely. So it's pretty much has a global reach now. So when a player has a global reach, they can start to endorse for any company that also has a global reach. Say like Coca-Cola, or since he switched now, Pepsi. Even Kia. Kia is a Korean company, right? So he can endorse for companies all over the world because he has such a global reach. So that's LeBron. Steph Curry made $30 million in salary, so a little bit more salary than LeBron, but he also made a little bit less in endorsements. He made $44 million in endorsements, which is still a huge number. And some of his endorsements are Callaway Golf. So we know Steph loves golf. He was able to parlay that into endorsement. Chase, just, yeah, I guess athletes are good at endorsing Chase. So Serena also has the Chase endorsement, Fanatics, and then Under Armour. And we know Under Armour because he's got the shoes with Under Armour. So he's, doing that for his endorsement. So he's got a good set of endorsements that pay him $44 million a year. Kevin Durant made $28.9 million in salary. So he's right in between both of those two in salary. And $35 million in endorsements, which, again, huge number. And some of his are degree, master, and dynamic. Again, I don't know what that is. You have to look that up. Nike and YouTube. So he's doing YouTube somehow, that's cool. Yeah, so, these guys, these basketball players, the reason why they're on the list, partly because of their salary, but they also knew how to take that status that they have as being well known as being some of the best players in the world and parlay that into endorsements. And again, you've seen Kevin Durant on commercials, you've seen Steph Curry on commercials. Anytime you see these guys on commercials, they're getting some money, right? So it's beautiful. That's what they're doing. They're figuring out how to take themselves and turn themselves into walking businesses.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really cool point, right? Is that this is one of the things, and a lot of young guys, especially in the NBA, will be smart to kind of look at where these guys are with their endorsements, right? Because, of course, when you're coming into the league, maybe you get a couple of big endorsements because you're a top rookie, but maybe you're not, right? What do these guys do? They have brands, in a sense, also that partner with who they are, right? Like when you think about Kevin Durant, he's always pretty good with pressure situations, maybe, right? So this degree deodorant, right? Like it goes with the kind of person he is. Well, what else? Steph Curry, his love for golf, right? Like, and him just doing good, right? It just kind of helped out that Callaway golf thing, So I think that it's cool that some of these endorsements and endorsements or whatever relate directly to who the players are. And they were able to have somebody that was around them, even if it was themselves or if it was somebody that knew what they were about, that were able to lead them in the direction of these types of partnerships, And I think that that's one of those things that's really valuable, is that you have to understand, like you said, who you are and how you can market yourself. Or somebody needs to understand it, right? Like somebody has to be there to say, hey, you have value. This is your value. Here are your opportunities. Some people can see it themselves and some of them can't, you know what I mean? But when you cash in on the right opportunity, you can make a lifelong connection, right? Callaway Golf, Steph Curry's probably going to always have that endorsement for the rest of his life. That's not going anywhere, Chase, maybe he won't be Chase forever, right? Fanatics, maybe he won't be Fanatics forever. But Callaway Golf, because it's so close to him, right? Like that's a part of his life that's always going to be there. And I think that that's one of the things that, that's pretty cool as well, as far as like these basketball players.
And they play in the Chase Center, right? Golden State. So I think that's just a natural tie-in right there too.
Yeah. So it's like a natural. So again, like it's going to be one of those things where he probably has it for a decent amount of time. And then maybe once he's not as, that's another thing that I'll talk about later. But maybe if he's not as relevant basketball wise, when there's other guys that come in later, maybe they'll take over those. But again, what you're thinking about here is you're thinking about longevity with these specific guys. And as we go along the conversation, I have some other things that I'll add into that with the opportunities that have arose or that have risen since they've gotten these endorsements and what they've allowed these players to do. So, all
right. So next, I want to talk about the GOAT. I'm gonna talk about the GOAT. Everybody's using that term. So this is somebody that everybody needs to aspire to. That is Tiger Woods. Take that however you want to take it, what I just said. Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods made $62.3 million, according to this report. 2.3 of it was in salary. 60 million was in endorsements, okay? That's great. That's ridiculously good. But if you look at the bottom of my notes section here, Tiger Woods has made $1.5 billion in non-golf income since he debuted in 96. I believe that was his debut. Since 1996. $1.5 billion in non-golf income. So you had people talking about Tiger Woods would be the first sports billionaire. And the way he has done that, at least has generated that much revenue that he's taken in, has been off of non-golf income. So Tiger Woods was probably the most famous athlete in the world at one point.
Yeah, very much so.
He was dominating his sport unlike anyone had dominated their sport. So he was really notable, and he just was a winner. And he had the look, he had like the fact that he was so put together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wanted Tiger Woods, and he took advantage of it, and he made so much money. So I don't use that term GOAT lightly. He has done something that most people can only hope of doing in terms of earning money from his notoriety and from his athletic ability. Some of his current endorsement partners right now, Bridgestone, Discovery Communications, where I think he has a TV show being developed on like the Golf Network, Hero Motorcorp, Monster Energy, Nike, which he has a long-time partnership with Nike before his 2009 problems, but he's back with Nike, I guess. Rolex, TaylorMade, Upper Deck, and again, $1.5 billion in non-golf income. So I don't care what you guys say. I already had an episode about I'm tired of talking about GOATs, but I'm going to tell you what, Tiger Woods, if you want to talk about somebody that's the GOAT, Tiger Woods, you better aspire to be him. $1.5 billion off of non-golf related. So you have to be good at what you do, but you have to turn that into sustainable revenue. And this guy made $2.3 million on the golf course this year, 60 off of it. So you be like Tiger in that respect.
So Tiger, he definitely, I think that's kind of like the epitome in the sense of marketing a player's abilities, right? And with Tiger, his likability was insanely high, and it spanned all cultures, all countries, right? Like everyone knew who Tiger Woods was, and everyone was amazed by what he did. And that right there is like, hey, this person touches every single person in the world in a way that he can capture their moment, right? Like when he's actually playing golf, people's eyes are glued when he's putting, right? When he's driving, right? And I think that that's a really interesting thing. And we kind of like talked about that with Federer also, where Federer, he exemplified something specific where a lot of people could connect with it, but it also had a kind of like a registry of elegance or class to it, right? Like when people saw Tiger Woods, even though he knocked the crap out of the ball, right? It was like a classy type of way, right? It wasn't anything that was just like basketball, so physical, so aggressive, right? But Tiger Woods was just smooth and like kind of like a beautiful type thing, you know what I mean? And I think that that's a different type of thing to kind of like think about. So again, who did he get? Rolex, smooth and elegant, right? Like it goes with that, right? So the player you are definitely affects those. But Tiger Woods had his shortcomings, I guess, or whatever with that whole situation, right? Lost a lot of endorsements, and now he's back to making 60 million in endorsements per year, which is pretty wild, you know what I mean? Because there's a lot of people that didn't know if he would even be good, right? Remember, after that whole time, he was in a slump for forever, right? He was in a slump, like a big slump. So it's not even all the perception of who he is. It's not even all the stuff in the past. Like, he just slumped as a player, but he was still able to turn that around and make a lot of endorsements. And I think that that's a really interesting story. So from a financial side, what he did is pretty amazing for sure.
And Tiger Woods almost united the entire country. I feel like he's about the only thing that could have united the entire country. Like, no matter where you were from, like you said, everybody loved Tiger Woods. And I bet it had to do with his multi-ethnic identity, right? He identifies with a lot of different backgrounds. So I think everyone could kind of claim Tiger Woods as one of their own, right? Like the Dave Chappelle racial draft thing, right? Everybody wanted Tiger Woods on their team because he was so successful and he was so just likable. It was something about him. It was a huge phenomenon, right? You can't deny that. I don't think there's been anything like it since. Like the love that people had for Tiger when he was big in the early to mid 2000s.
Wow. Side note, I'll call this a Jeremy moment because I always have my Jeremy moments where you like make me think about something that's really crazy. You know, when we talked about Federer and when we're talking about Tiger, even though there were other athletes that were in the sport and they were doing really good, it made it seem like the sport was all about them. You know, like golf, there was other people that were there but it was all about Tiger, right? And it's an individual sport. Federer, it was all about Federer. Again, an individual sport. It's kind of crazy to see that certain athletes that play team sports can kind of make the game all about them. You know what I mean? And at a time, and I know he's not on this list, but I wonder where he would sit because he's not playing sports. But Michael Jordan, you know, at a time, he made basketball all about him, right? Like, that's who it was about. Like, it wasn't, there was the NBA, but it was more like Michael Jordan, right? Like, we tuned in to see what he was going to do. And it was easy to see because once he left the sport, right, like, basketball kind of was like, you know? And I think that that's one of the interesting things is that if you're able to dominate your sport and you're able to become the face of your sport, it offers so much more in endorsement opportunities going to the future. So yeah, like there's some guys that are trying to do that with basketball, right? He made 60 million this year. And then we said, how much was it? LeBron made 60 million, right?
Yeah.
He made that in a team sport, but endorsements from other places. And I think that that's something to really take in is that LeBron James is getting endorsement money from the same level as some of these guys from a individual sport, which is crazy type of market share, you know, if you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there is a little difference, though, in that today, you know what I mean? You can get a lot more for endorsements and things like that. But the Tiger phenomenon, though, you have to admit, there's not been a player since, I don't think, in any sport that had that same type of impact. I can't see it. I don't think LeBron, I don't think Kevin Durant, I don't think Steph Curry, those guys that are on the list right now, they haven't had that sort of unifying effect on the entire country. Even Roger Federer, you can compare those two. I think Tiger Woods' impact was bigger. There was just something dynamic about Tiger Woods, you know what I mean? And about his ability to unify the country in a sense, at least through when he was on the TV and he was playing well in golfing. There were no problems, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was just something about it that was dynamic.
I was going to say, part of it, I think, came from most people didn't really, two things. Most people didn't know golf. They just knew that Tiger was amazing to see and watch, you know? They didn't know what golf was, so they didn't have an opinion. They had no opinion about golf. They just saw this guy dominating, continuously winning, and they started liking seeing a ball hit super far, right? Or they ended up finding value in a super long putt, right? Like they never been to putt before. You know what I mean? But they were like, wow, like, did you see that putt? You know what I mean? And then other people had to be like, yeah, I saw that putt. It was like a social thing. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But with LeBron, everybody knows basketball. Everybody critiques LeBron, right? So that's the difference. LeBron's getting critiqued about stuff, even if he's doing amazing things. And Tiger wasn't. He was just getting appreciated for everything that he did because people didn't know what was good or bad in golf, you know what I mean, to critique him. So the only thing that they saw was positive things coming from that direction. So that's another thing to kind of think about with the comparison between those two.
Yeah. But it's just an interesting comparison because I didn't know I would react this emotionally to the Tiger Woods thing. But when I just go back and I think about the influence that Tiger Woods had, it just makes me think, wow, that was an amazing moment in time. You know what I mean? It's just something that I don't think I've experienced since. Every comedian had a Tiger Woods joke. Black people were talking about golfing. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was just a different thing where something that was completely inaccessible or completely not considered had been opened to on a great, large scale, as opposed to any other thing. It's just a different type of phenomenon.
Yeah, like I said, I think that it's not necessarily just the phenomenon, but it's like the phenomenon had the perfect storm type of thing. It was somebody that was multi yeah, right. And then I'm just gonna leave it there. And in addition to that, they were performing well in a sport that we didn't see that before, right? We saw Vijay Singh, you know what I mean? Like, and that was kind of like, that was it, you know what I mean? In a sense, right? Like you had your Vijay Singhs and then you have like,
even though I was like, Vijay Singh, he's dark, I'll root for him.
I know, but right? But it was just more about choice. And now you have someone that's associated to you, that's dominating, that everybody enjoys to play. again, about a sport that they didn't know. So people are in barbershops arguing Tiger Woods is the greatest golfer ever. They don't know golf. They didn't even know golf. It didn't even matter if he was or wasn't, right? It's just about, he was something new. And that's where it came from. He was something new, and people always talk about things that are new, right? Instagram was new. TikTok was new, and it just expanded and turned into these whatever, and people just kept talking about it. And it was because there was nothing out there like it before. And that's one of the reasons I think that Tiger Woods had such a big influence. He touched a lot of people. But it was also because there was a market specifically for it. It was the perfect storm for him. And last point for that one is that he succeeded at the highest level at a very, very early age. So it was easy to catch on at the beginning compared to LeBron, where you're waiting around for this messiah, I guess, in a sense, to win his championships or to lead his team, and Tiger just came in and you're like, oh, wow, we're just jumping into the story.
His clothes looked like they were too big for him when he was winning, Tiger. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like it was an instant press start button on his greatness from the moment he kind of came into the sport. And that's a different thing, right?
Really cool. Really cool being able to talk about that, because I feel like that's like maybe even a different conversation, but that elicited some things I didn't think it would. So I think that's really cool. So let's go to number 9 and number 10 on the list. These are our first football players I talked about already, Kirk Cousins and Carson Wentz. And Kirk Cousins made $60.5 million, where 58 of it was salary and signing bonus, and 2.5 of it was endorsements. And then Carson Wentz made 59.1, where 55.1 of it was salary and signing bonus, and then $4 million was endorsements. So basically, the football players that are on the list, and it makes perfect sense, is they get these signing bonuses. You get X amount guaranteed, and you get it all in one lump sum or whatever, and then that puts you on this list. It's not like the salaries are going to be super, super high. They play the quarterbacks as much as they can. But when you start throwing in those salaries, the signing bonuses to the salary, then you start getting these $58, $59 million payments and all that. And that's what we're going to see with Mahomes at some point, is he's going to get his stuff thrown into a signing bonus. And when they restructure these contracts and they get these huge signing bonuses, that's how you get these $58 million compensations or whatever. So that to me doesn't say as much about the sport as it does just about how they structure contracts in order to make them more team friendly or whatever.
Yeah, I'll add 2 things in there. Also, one of the things about the football players is that all these quarterbacks are trash, but they're making a lot of money off of signing bonuses. So if you're trying to be in the NFL, be a trash quarterback, you'll get paid. Just have somebody believe in you, and that's what that's what you need.
Well, I won't endorse being a trash quarterback. Don't go out and don't set out to be a trash quarterback. Try to be a good quarterback. But what Paul said about having someone believe in you is exactly what is going on there. You need someone to believe in you. You need someone that sticks their neck out. Kirk Cousins' story is a little ridiculous in that he was drafted the same year as RG3. I remember I was in DC with some of my friends, and we were watching the Washington football team back then. They were, RG3 was starting the preseason game, and they got down pretty big. They put Kirk Cousins in. We actually went out to go eat or something, and we came back, and then they had won the game or something like that behind Kirk Cousins, and then it was automatically quarterback controversy in DC already, and it felt like Kirk Cousins was drafted just in case RG3 didn't pan out, and he was Mike Shanahan's guy that he actually wanted, and it felt like Kirk Cousins was favored all along. And then even with Washington, they seem to have wanted him to be there over RG3. And it just turned out he ended up being the starter. He ended up going to the Vikings. And even though they're franchising him or whatever, and he's going through that stuff, he's still getting paid a lot of money because somebody believed in him. Whereas RG3 has to be a backup now. Yeah. And you can't say that RG3 wasn't a dynamic, much better player. He just didn't have someone rooting for him, someone pulling for him after he suffered that knee injury, trying to keep his team in contention and all that. Yeah,
for sure, right? And that's one of the things is that it just all depends on who's believing in you at the time. And like I said, Carson Wentz, partially, in a sense, you can say he earned his salary because he took the Eagles, you know what I mean? And that was impressive, you know what I mean? But since then, not much, And now he's talked about getting traded. Jared Goff, you're like, who was that dude again? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then, like I said,
Jared Goff is number 15 on the list,
number
by
15,
the way.
yeah. So 9, 10, and 15, right? And I think that's kind of interesting. The last part that I wanted to talk about with football players is this endorsement part, right? Like, their endorsements are so low compared to some of the other guys, right? And of course, we have the quarterbacks up here. There may be some other football players that have higher amounts of endorsements. But their salaries plus their endorsements aren't necessarily as high. And I think that one of the things to kind of keep in mind is that for football players, compared to all these other sports, their face is being blocked the whole time that they're playing. You know, so they're not as visible as some of these other sports. And because they're not as visible, they're not as marketable to these companies. And that's something to keep in mind, is that if you're a football player, you have to realize that from the sport, your marketability right away is just going to go down compared to other sports. So you have to figure out how can you set yourself up for success when it's going to be hard, right? Because even if you look at a football game, sometimes you don't know which receiver caught the ball. You're like, oh, now that's somebody else. You know what I mean? But you know every time LeBron makes a dunk, right? You know every time KD makes a shot. And I think that that's the difference with the endorsement parts. It's just not as valuable with NFL football from a personal standpoint. Team-wise, good. But from a person making endorsements, maybe not the best environment. So,
yeah, and that's an interesting point because you really have to set yourself apart. And you know who one of the most famous, popular football players is now, still?
Who was that?
Deion Sanders.
Deion.
You see him on Subway commercials?
Probably. I don't watch TV.
Oh, you're one of those people.
I just don't have it.
Deion Sanders
I can't afford it.
Stays on Subway commercials right now. Deion Sanders got hired at Jacksonville State.
Yeah.
I think because of his ability to relate and to recruit, because what he did in college, setting himself up as prime time, wearing the do-rag or whatever, the bandana on his head under the helmet, and playing 2 sports. He did a lot to make himself famous.
Yeah.
You know, his song Must Be the Money, like all that stuff. Like he really did set himself apart, and it continues to pay off for him because he still gets endorsements, and he's not played in a very, very long time. So that's exactly the point where you're saying is like, if these football players don't do something to set themselves apart, they're going to just be lost in the wash because being humble isn't going to get you paid. Amari Cooper, one of the most humble guys you can think of, it's not going to help off the field because nobody knows who he is. Nobody knows the sound of his voice,
it's
right?
like,
he's doing really well on the field and getting paid really well on the field, but it's not going to help if no one knows who he is. Now, Dak, as we said, we should go into Dak later. We still got to look up some of his numbers because on our first Dak episode, we talked about some of his endorsing partners. Now, I would like to see what his actual estimated endorsement pay is because he has a lot of endorsements too. And he got the yogurt endorsement after Cam lost it for his comments about women or something.
Yeah.
So some of these guys, basically set yourself apart and make sure people know your face. It helps being a quarterback. But regardless, you need to, as a football player, really get your face out there.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think that just one more thing to kind of like add to that is that the same things that we were saying before, as a football player, you have to make sure that you're marketing who you are, right? Because those things come across, right? And I'll tell you what, I'm glad that Dak came out about like his mental health as well and talked about that and discussed that. That right there is going to open up a ton of endorsement opportunities just because of that. Not because he has that effect or he's experiencing different types of mental health issues. But because he's open to talking about it, he did it freely. And he's a natural guy that you can see and you can look at. And I don't know, he's one of those guys that you could sit down and like listen to him talk about some stuff for a while. Like he has that type of vibe. It's kind of like I don't want to say a boring type of vibe, but it's kind of like a stoic type of vibe, And that right there he was being himself, and now it opened up different types of partnerships for himself. You know what I mean? And it should open up different types of endorsements. And I think that that's one of the key things is you still have to be yourself, right? But you have to align yourself with those specific things. And you have to figure out times when you can actually be yourself as well. So say, for example, just bringing in this last example, another player that has been around for a while that still has endorsements and contracts is Troy Polamalu. What did he do? Well, he had just like, what they say, like beautiful hair or whatever, right? Like this long curly hair, right? Like he's doing this, right? And it's working for him, right? And he's still getting money off of that because why? Well, he was visible. You know how we talked about a lot of players not being able to be that visible in the NFL because their face is covered? Well, you know where he was because his hair, right? Like you saw that hair and you're like, oh, Troy Polamalu did that, right? So he was more marketable, you know, even though he wasn't in the quarterback position. I thought that's pretty cool because now he did that and now he's opening up the way for, what is it, Patrick Mahomes is now with them as well. So I think that that's kind of cool.
Mahomes is getting it.
Oh, he has
Mahomes
to.
is definitely getting it.
Yeah.
He's not on this list, but I know he's in commercials for Amazon Web Services, State Farm, obviously. That whatever that shampoo is, that's funny. I see him on the commercial, don't even absorb it. All I know is he's in the commercial. I can't take
and that's bad because that means their marketing is not working. Yeah, I think it's Head and Shoulders.
yeah.
But yeah.
It's a good save.
But yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? Because now you're thinking about it, you're like, wow, like NFL players, you really do have to step outside. And if I'm an NFL player, I'm probably hanging out with NBA players all the time. Like, just because you know that there's going to be paparazzi there's going to be people, there's going to be endorsement opportunities, there's going to be whatever. Like, they're going to see you, they're going to be like, oh yeah, he does this, he hangs out with, it opens up opportunities, you know, because outside of that, you're not getting viewed.
Yeah. James Harden, you should hang out with James Harden.
Oh, that boy, wow. That boy, wow, boy.
You know, he's going to have people around him.
But, yeah, so anyways, as far as like the NFL, like I said, I think that it's definitely harder for NFL athletes, because of the way the sport is, but they could definitely try to do something. Maybe they could start up a 7-on-7 like league or something outside of that. That's touch or whatever. And players could get more endorsement notoriety.
You remember they had something like that, right? They had something like that where it was like Michael Vick was in it and Ocho Cinco was in it or something like that. There's another guy, Ocho Cinco, who was really trying to get endorsements. He obviously changed his last name to get more popularity. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure those guys would kind of dominate the league, though. It would be like the big three. You know what I mean? Where you have the older guys that people want to see still play, or like old boxing matches that we're doing now. Things like that. I think the old people would come back.
Oh, interesting enough to say that I think that that's what's going to end up changing the sport now that you've kind of like put that out there. A way that you can have football that is more marketable. Because if players know that they can join a different league, be more marketable, maybe be a little bit more safe with their career and add to longevity where they can make more financially long term, that could be a real challenger. And maybe that's what some of the other different types of leagues have been trying to do, because as we can see, with Kirk Cousins getting 2.5 million in endorsements, there's not as much out there, and there's a lot more to be made if you're looking at some of the other guys that are at the tops of their position. So cool.
Yeah, and that's a really cool idea to think about, that you could actually gear your revenue earning opportunities to endorsements more than compensation on the field. Maybe you do you join that flag football league so that people can see you, so that people can get to know you, and then you can really take off and do other things. Almost like if you're like Michael Strahan, you know what I'm saying? Michael Strahan went from being a football player to being a TV personality in overnight.
An annoying football player. I want to add that in there. I used to think he was so annoying.
Yeah, he was annoying.
And then he got on like, what is it, the morning show or whatever, and then like that. I've never seen that type of transition. No, like so likable.
He went from the football show too. He was doing like the NFL stuff that you would predict. That makes sense. Yeah. And then he's on Good Morning America. You're like, how did he swing this?
Yeah.
what a transformation like that. That was a great move. However he did it, man. What a savvy, right? He just did it. And then it's like Michael Strahan is no longer ex-football player Michael Strahan. He's just Michael Strahan now.
Yeah.
Like, you don't know why you know him. He's just Michael Strahan.
Isn't it funny to think about some of these players, right? And I think that, quick thing, a lot of football players, they really make that endorsement money after they get out the league when they can really not have a helmet on all the time, especially when they're in the media. But I was going to say, isn't it interesting that with athletes, the ones that make that transition to something else, you just forget about the athletic part. Like a lot of people don't remember about the athletic part at times. Like Michael Strahan, like broke the sack record. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, 20 years from now, people are going to be like, oh yeah, that Michael Strahan guy, he's pretty funny. Be like, oh yeah, you know, he broke the NFL sack record. They're going to be like, wait, what? That dude? It's like, yeah, him, that funny guy. He broke the NFL sack record. It's like, no, he didn't. And then you look it up and you're like, what? So it's kind of interesting that when you brought up that point, players can change around their identity from an athlete to whatever they want because of that recognition if they know how to utilize their marketability. And that's really, really dope. So
yeah, that's a rare transition that Strahan achieved though.
I
don't think many people are pulling that transition off. That's like magic, man, what he did. That's impressive.
But again, what did he do? Right? He used his strengths, right? He used who he was. He's a guy that just talks a lot of crap, right? That's why he was annoying. He was annoying because he knew how to get to people. He knew how to talk to crap. He looked at things from a different type of perspective that were funny if you hear it and you're on his team. If you're on the other team, you're like, I hate this dude. You know what I mean? But like now, since he's not on anybody's team and he's just out there just making jokes and stuff, you're just like, I could watch this. Like, this guy is actually funny. I didn't like him as a football player, but now you know why. So you have to do something that relates along with who you are. It has to be a natural type of thing. If not, it just won't fit. I think, you know, what did Barry Sanders, was it Subway that Barry Sanders did? Eat Fresh or something?
I think so.
Like, Barry Sanders is so awkward. You know what I mean? But like, for some reason, like the commercials, I think because people knew that Barry Sanders was awkward. Like the commercials were okay. You're just like, yeah, that's Barry Sanders. I like Barry Sanders. Subway's all right. I'll get some Subway. You know what I mean? But it was just awkward. But for some reason, it fit. You know what I mean? But there's some players that they just don't necessarily fit. But I was just thinking about that specific type of tangent. Then I was trying to think about some players that don't fit. And then I started thinking about Shaq with his little dancer.
I don't know how Shaq ended up like. I don't know how people like. You know, I never bought Shaq being such a outgoing, dynamic personality. If people say that's what he is, then okay. But it just never seemed to. I didn't get it. You know what I'm saying? And that's not to say that Shaq shouldn't be getting his endorsements and that Shaq shouldn't eat or whatever. And I'm not saying that at all. I just didn't get it.
I mean, what part didn't you get exactly? I guess in a sense.
Just the whole Shaq thing, like his whole deal. I just don't get it. Like I like Shaq, I respect Shaq, but I seen Shaq has a new reality show on, and I was watching that, and I was like, that's okay, but it's not great, you know. Quick
thing about Shaq. I'll take 1 minute of your time. With Shaq, the whole understanding of who he is and his endorsement thing goes all the way back to it's just who he is, right? Like it's not even that. Shaq is an endorsement. He's been an endorsement from the day he's been there. He's built to be in front of cameras because he just has that likable smile. He has that personality and he's a giant, right? Like no one ever saw that from some 7-foot dude, like just coming out and being silly and ooh, and you know what I mean? It's like, oh wow, like this guy, everybody notices him because he's super tall. He's telling jokes, but he's also a beast on the basketball court that can do crazy things. Like that right there is just something to embrace and be in awe of, you know? And I think that that's what happened. And then from the first moment, what did Shaq do? He jumped into a movie, right? Like he's in Blue Chip, like when he's young, right? Like he's always had that mindset to do that type of thing, right? Then he went to Shazam, right? Like it's not necessarily
Kazam.
Yeah. It's not even just the endorsements with Shaq. Shaq is more of just like, that's just who he is. You know, it's kind of like, you know how we talk about like Magic and Magic just having some type of like aura about him where you just kind of see it.
Yeah.
Shaq has another aura, maybe not a Magic aura, but he has a type of aura around him, and that just opens up his endorsements. So it opened it up when who was thinking about putting a basketball player in a movie that was super young, like back then? Shaq, Ray Allen. You know what I mean? Like those are like Penny. The only. Oh yeah, Shaq, Ray Allen, Penny. Right?
Penny was in Blue Chips too. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know why Penny was in Blue Chips though?
Because Shaq was in it.
Pretty much. Pretty much. But anyways, so it's just kind of like, this is the thing. You should look up, I don't know if you saw their interview before with the Shaq and Penny and how they became on the same team, and how Shaq was like, hey, there's this guy that I played this movie with. You know what I mean? Like, but anyways, like that part's pretty cool. But big thing I want to say is that Shaq is he's marketing. And in addition to marketing, Shaq understood who he was. He understood his marketability. He understood his value, and he also had a business mindset. And he took that approach and said, how can I expand as much as possible? Even his ugly shoes were marketable, right? Because they were Shaquille O'Neal's, you know, the white ones with the black circles. They were marketable, right? Everything that he touches is marketable because it's attached to his silliness and his persona. And I think that that's one of the things that's really amazing. In addition, shout out to Shaq on getting his master's in business and taking that step to say, hey, I understand this is a business. Like, you don't have to tell me. I've always known this, but now I just know what you guys are talking about. You know, and this happened a while ago, but he still uses it nowadays. And I think that that's one of the things that people don't think about. There's athletes out there that are getting smarter with the business side of things because they understand the value that's in there. And that's one of the things. So
I do think another interesting thing though about Shaq, since we're on that, is that I think he just wanted to do everything, and he just put himself in a position where he could. I mean, he did have a rap album or two, right? You know, Shaq was he loved to rap, so he got a rap album, and he wanted to be in a movie, so he did that. And I just think he's the type of person that, like you said, he is larger than life. So I think maybe that helps. If Shaq says he wants to do something, are you gonna tell him no? So at that point, you know, if he wants to do it, then hey, he's going to do it. So I think that's part of it, is like that's part of his personality to want to do that type of stuff too. Mm-hmm. But like I said, like I don't have any problem with Shaq. I do like Shaq a lot, as anyone does, because it's hard not to like Shaq. I just didn't necessarily get it. You know what I'm saying? Like what everyone else saw in terms of the whole marketability stuff.
I think that what you just said was a perfect thing. You didn't get it. And you didn't have to get it. That's the point. It's just because it was natural. That's just who he was. Like, there was nothing. You didn't have to try to market Shaq. He was marketing himself. You know, and I think that that's the thing, is that, like, with Roger Federer, right? Like, all right, you had to have him say a specific line and show that he's elegant with the way that he talks. Shaq is just, every moment that he does something, he's marketing every single product that he has, because he just.
Yeah. And I don't think he has any sort of, like, embarrassment. You know what I'm saying? I think he's one of those people. He doesn't get embarrassed or anything, like whatever.
No, none. Yeah, none. And can I, speaking of the embarrassment and that part and marketability, can we talk about one more person that's on this list real quick?
Yeah.
And the person is Conor McGregor, right? And I want to talk about Conor McGregor just because you know what's kind of weird is that Conor doesn't get embarrassed that often, right? Like, you would think that he would get embarrassed by some of the things that happen, but he just kind of like shrugs them off, right? And it's kind of interesting is that if he doesn't get embarrassed, then it's kind of hard for people to feel like, oh, he should be embarrassed, right? Because it's like, oh, he handled it with dignity or whatever. Okay, whatever, right? But at the same time, Conor McGregor has a endorsement with Wynn, right? With Wynn Resorts, right? So Wynn is like a big, like it's really about the big hotel chain in Vegas, right? In the nightclub, and basically them having some type of partnership. And that's pretty crazy because Conor basically said, I'm going to have a party at the Wynn after my match, no matter if I win or if I lose, right? There is no embarrassment, right? And to think about that from an endorsement and marketing standpoint, what does that say? It says that they don't necessarily care if you're a winner or a loser. You just need to be marketable, right? You need to be somebody that people want to come out and see. for whatever reason it is. There's going to be people that come out to see Conor to be like, man, he's probably going to be sad. He's probably going to be mad. And then, nah, he was up there and he was happy. And then they're like, oh, this dude's happy. He just got beat. All right, whatever. That dude's weird. And then they just go and have a good time. But he still sells tickets. So I think that that's a really cool thing to think about with marketability is that Conor's shown he's selling with his endorsements. He's selling people are going to follow him no matter what. Right. And that's an interesting point that I thought about. And I wanted to kind of like bring that in because we were talking about the Shaq and the embarrassment. And Conor, he doesn't get embarrassed either. And it's that same type of technique. And because of that, he's bringing in 16 million in endorsements. And he'll probably keep doing that for a little bit. So,
yeah, that's sustainable. Definitely. I think when it comes to combat sports, I think that it goes to show that they have to sell themselves, right, in order to get people to watch a fight. So Conor McGregor is at the point where he needs to get people to watch a pay-per-view event so he can make $50 million a fight, right? He's capable of making that type of money if the pay-per-view receipts are right. So he's got to get people watching. You see this with boxing all the time. They always get into the fight at the press conference, and then people are going to want to buy that, and then they're going to make more money off the gate. So a lot of things like that, where if you're in a combat sport, it's a tough way to earn a living. You got to get beat up for a living. Yeah. So you got to make sure you capitalize on the opportunities to get money when you're fighting. But we clearly see that Conor McGregor on this list anyway is the most marketable combat sport athlete because of probably his international appeal. You know what I'm saying? Probably because he talks a lot of trash.
Yeah.
And you, like you said, you don't have to necessarily be the best all the time, but you do have to be the best at some point. And Conor McGregor was the best at some point. He's taken a few losses since then, but it doesn't matter at this point because Conor McGregor established who he was. The Conor McGregor brand is now established, so it's okay if he loses. It's okay if he steps away. He'll still be Conor McGregor, right? Same thing with Ronda Rousey. Remember when she was on top, she was endorsing all types of stuff. She was seen as like the best thing ever, but then when she lost, she probably took it too hard. And then that probably changed, her marketability. And then she did some other things after that maybe weren't conducive to marketing success. But I think when she was on top and, she was in commercials and stuff, she was really taking advantage. But she probably should have stayed with her career move and stayed with the MMA and continued to be the baddest, woman on the planet kind of thing. But, it goes to show, once you have been at least at the top, your opportunities are way open. They're so far open. You just have to make sure you choose correctly after that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And one of the things, just small thing that you may think about with Conor, an interesting thing was this recent fight, his mannerisms, the way that he went about the pre-fight stuff was a lot different than what he's done in the past. And I wonder if that is going to affect his marketability, because now what was marketable was his ridiculousness, like his crazy type of mindset pre-show, like getting in somebody's face, right? News media will talk about Conor McGregor gets in somebody's face. They'll show the pictures. They'll do all this other stuff. But when it's a nice and gentle, casual situation, they're like, we can't sell that. Conor McGregor came in and he was nice, like that only works one time. So with that said, I just want to say that loud mouths are perfect endorsement opportunities because they're always going to be talked about by some type of media outlet. And that's one of the things that kind of controls this whole thing as well. So,
yep. And so we talked about the combat sport athletes. Most of them make their money off of fights as opposed to endorsements. They've just not been great at getting endorsements. Tyson Fury made $50 million off of fights and $7 million off of endorsements. $7 million is good, but it's nowhere near the 50 that he made from fighting. Again, you said Conor McGregor made $16 million off endorsements versus 32 off of fights, which is really good. Anthony Joshua, $36 million off of fighting and 11 off of endorsements. So that's also really good too. So Anthony Joshua is doing a good job of endorsing and getting himself. He's got the AP, the watch thing too, like Serena. He's doing Beats, DAZN, EA, Hugo Boss, Jaguar, Under Armour, William Hill. So, he's from the UK. I wonder if that also helps his capabilities, being, again, like, I think there's something about European stars, once they reach a certain level, that it increases their opportunities and they can become really profitable. And then Deontay Wilder, 0.5 million in endorsements, and I don't even know what he endorsed, but he made $46 million off of fighting. So good job making money off of fighting, but if he could start getting some more endorsements, he'd really cement himself. So those are the combat sports. I want to talk about one outlier in this, in that there's one person from the field of auto racing on this list in the top 20. That would be Lewis Hamilton. And I think everybody knows Lewis Hamilton to be a great, great driver. He's got, I think, tied for the record for the most championships. So he's really well accomplished. He's making $42 million off of his contract with Mercedes. So he has a contract. So I don't know how it works, but he's got a contract. And his contract is going to be it's going to be close to $70 million at some point for racing for a year. This is a contract. This isn't like you might could get this money. This is almost like the soccer players, like the amount of money he's able to make in this contract. He's got $12 million from endorsements as well. But just his contract right now with Mercedes to be one of the most dominant drivers in history is just crazy high. So that's just an outlier because there's no one else in his field on the top 20 list. And it just goes to show you, if you're really good at what you do, you can make enough in salary to be really successful, right? But you also do want to make sure you add to that with your endorsements. Another person that's right below him, Rory McIlroy, $22 million in salary from golf, which is great from golf, $30 million in endorsements. So he's one of those players that's flipped the script and made more in endorsements than he has on the field or while playing his sport. And again, that should be reproducible. So that's just an interesting one I just saw right there, that Rory McIlroy, a very successful golfer, makes so much in endorsements. So you wonder, should you move to Europe or something and see if you can start getting these endorsements or something? Like, what is it? What is it about that? I don't know.
So just kind of going along with that, there's two parts that I thought were interesting, especially with the boxing part, is that these guys, especially when you're talking about the American ones compared to European, I think there is something with the European, right? And if you think about a lot of the European brands, right, they're typically elegance, this class type of thing. And if you can get into that with a classy type of sport, then you're good. So I think that one of the interesting things is with Joshua, well, he's represented by a lot of different things, right? Beats, which could make sense. The watch, which makes sense, right? EA Sports, right, for their boxing stuff. That makes sense. Hugo Boss, maybe some strong cologne. Jaguar, it's a car, but it's kind of elegant, but it's supposed to be fierce, right? Like a Jaguar, right? So it makes sense.
It's British too, right?
Right. Again, yeah. I had to double check on that one. But then Under Armour and whatever, right? So again, if you think about his type of endorsements, they kind of fit. And if you think about Anthony Joshua, he's more of I'd say he's kind of like more of like the pretty boy type boxer. If you think about it, comparing to like Tyson Fury, where you're like, Tyson Fury made 7, but he could make it this way. The only reason why to bring that up is to say that if you're an elegant brand, you're probably going to pay a lot more in endorsements than you would if you're just like Jack Link's beef jerky, you know what I mean, with Tyson Fury, you know what I mean, or wherever he is, right? Because Tyson Fury's like, oh yeah, come and get this. It's like, oh yeah, come and get in this Mercedes Benz. It's like, yeah, it doesn't match, So I think that that's one of the things that's actually interesting. And again, like you were saying with Hamilton, he actually is making a lot of money, right? But again, where is it coming from? This elegant brand. And although there's not any other auto racing people that are on this specific list, right? One of the athletes that I thought was pretty interesting that came about in the past was Danica Patrick, right? And if you think about Danica, right, her net worth right now is like $80 million. Tony Stewart's is $90 million, right? And when you think about them car driver wise, like they're totally different type of people, right? Or totally different type of history and storyline that both went through different things. But for her to make $80 million, especially early on when it took her forever to like win a race or whatever, because she won but yeah, it took her forever. Yeah. But in that time, she was like, well, or somebody around her was like, hey, you need to do some marketing. We got these people called a GoDaddy, right? I didn't even really know what a GoDaddy was. I saw all the commercials, never had any idea. I just kept seeing Danica GoDaddy, and then she was selling like a feminine image of a race car driver to sell like website names or something, you know what I mean? But again, they saw some type of marketability there, and she cashed in and she did a lot of stuff with that. And I thought that was actually interesting, is that even Danica Patrick, she saw this type of marketability, and there was a specific market for her in a male dominated sport. You know what I mean? And I thought that was really, really cool. And even the stuff that she did afterwards. Side note, how old is Danica Patrick, by the way? How old do you think Danica Patrick is?
35?
She's like 38. For some reason, I don't know why I aged her so much. I was like, I don't know. I feel like Danica Patrick was like 50 or something, because I feel like she was really relevant a long time ago.
Like a long time.
And then it just kind of like went away. But she was really relevant when she first came out, just like Tiger Woods. But Tiger Woods kind of stayed more relevant throughout. And I thought that was actually another interesting point. So,
and you compared her to Tony Stewart. Tony Stewart owns a racing team, I'm pretty sure. So he should be able to make even more based off of owning a team than her, but it's not really significant compared to how much she made, right? It's that $10 million gap in their net worth.
Yeah. And just like some of the endorsements that I saw, like Coca-Cola, Chevrolet, like Peak Antifreeze. Like she has an antifreeze company that she's working with, Nationwide Insurance. And then she has the next part of how athletes make money that we should definitely talk about is she made her own clothing line. So she started a business, right? And then she also has a wine vineyard as well, you know? So these athletes are marketing out and using their money to kind of reinvest. And I thought that was pretty cool.
That's a Drew Bledsoe kind of thing. He's got a wine. I know he's got a big wine thing. And then I know like the Williams sisters, they're really big into fashion. So they both have their own brands. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, taking that money, investing it in businesses was something that you're also passionate about if you have that, right? But I think what we're talking about right now goes to show that how do you accumulate the money first to be able to be in a position where you can then explore other ventures when you have the free time and the flexibility to do it.
Yeah, and that's kind of like my next point, is that we put together this list and we talked about a lot of these top athletes, right? We looked at the top 20 on the Forbes list, but we see that this is a small amount of athletes, right? Who is this going to be most relevant for? Well, a lot of those bigger athletes, they have money, right? Like they have somebody, they have these super agents, they have these people that know how to market them correctly.
Right.
But a lot of these younger guys, right, that are coming into the league, maybe they're not starters. Maybe they're third round picks or second round picks or whatever, right? What do? What are going to be some of the things that they can do? Well, I think that it's cool to know that you can kind of market yourself in alignment with what you're doing, right? And then say, okay, well, now that you've invested that money early or made that money early, now you can start to think about endorsements, and now you can start to think about investments. And those early investments, not only in just random products, but things that are similar to you, are going to be very valuable, because now it shows that you can be marketable in the future. It lets other companies and other brands know that, hey, this person is somebody that we can use for our endorsements also, because we saw what they did here, and that kind of could work with us as well. So that's kind of bringing in that next part, is saying, well, hey, how do these athletes make money? Well, they start making money by the endorsements, but then they continue making money by their investments, because not all of these athletes are going to continue to have endorsements year after year after year after year.
Yeah, and I do think that that's a separate talk that we should have, where we can go through and talk about what type of investments that these athletes are making, and what's kind of the floor that you need as far as money to get in on certain investments. You know, I mean, Kevin Durant went out to Golden State because he knew that in that area he could start investing in tech apps and things like that. Like he could take $100,000 and put it in an app and own 10% of something. Or, you know, it was a huge deal, 50 Cent and Vitamin Water, or Dr. Dre and Beats, right? There's so many different things where people spend some of their money, and the valuation of the company grows so much that they're now rich beyond their wildest imagination from that one investment. So I think that's really good to talk about some of the things that athletes have invested in, and I'd love to have a separate talk about that too. And one more thing I was thinking about before, you know, what's one of the most notable celebrity endorsements for something. I think about the Foreman grill. I think about that one and that whole story, how that came about. Apparently, it was being shopped around, and a lot of people passed on it before, including Hulk Hogan, apparently. And George Foreman just decided to do it. And this was after Foreman was not famous anymore, right? So, in an example of a player, a former athlete, still using what fame that they had in order to try to make some money by endorsing, and the product took off in a way that was beyond his own thought of what could actually happen. So I think you also have to make sure that you take advantage. And what you said, I think, was really, really good in that the product has to be something that you can identify with. If you're not a fancy guy, not a fancy gal, then you can't really be endorsing the fancy products, and that's okay. But you can endorse the things that make sense for you, things that you would probably use, or things that people can imagine you using. So if it seems like a natural fit, it goes a lot farther than if it seems a little bit not quite natural, right? So I think that's a really good point that you made there, and that's a good takeaway from this conversation.
For sure. Yeah. I think just kind of like adding to that, I think that when we're talking about this, right, our topic kind of started out with how athletes make money, right? And we're really talking about this Forbes list, and this one seems to be mostly focused on like salary and endorsements, right? So maybe we could do, like you said, another show where we talk about, well, how do they make money with their own businesses, right? Or how do they make money with their investments? Or how do they make money with social media? Because these are still things that come into this same area. They're still making money. They're still using resources outside of just themselves, but it still goes into the value. And with social media, say, for example, being so relevant, right? Like, I think that I don't know if we have to tie that into this conversation, but that endorsement part and how we're talking about it, like a lot of that stuff comes from social media as well for a lot of these guys, because what happens is now people get to see how this person is. They see that they have a lot of different followers. And because of that, that means that if they're marketable, right, or if they have a lot of followers, then you can market them with anything. And there's going to be some people that see this. So you're going to have an atmosphere, an avenue. So social media is probably one of the biggest things as well. In addition to that, like a lot of athletes are basically, I'll say this, a lot of athletes that get out of the game or even that are early in the game, what they do is they kind of look and say, well, what they do is I feel like they invest in how people make money off of them as well. And I think that that's one of the interesting things. And I think that's going to be the next transition of how athletes make money, is because they're going to start investing in things that people make money off of them. And one of the things to kind of bring that forward is Naomi Osaka, right? Did you see her recent story, by the way?
No, what?
I believe.
Oh, the Carolina NWSL
so
team.
Again, maybe they didn't make money off of her. She didn't, like, soccer didn't make money off of her, right? But now she's like, I see how profitable this can be. I see how sports can be profitable. I see how this can be something that I should invest in, right? She had to make that money. She had the endorsements, and now she can start to reinvest it. And that's what's really going to make her that long-term money in her athletic career as well. So I just thought about that part, but we can bring that in a different discussion as well.
Yeah, definitely. I like this because this can be kind of the first part of a 2-part or a 3-part series, because investments is a whole different thing, because you can just name, like, all the richest athletes are making a bunch of investments, right? So I think we can save that for a different talk, and, just keep the audience can definitely come back. So everybody, we're definitely going to have to do at least a second part to this.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe a third. It just depends on where that second conversation goes.
Yeah, at least 2 to 3 for sure.
Yeah, and that'll be a good one, because all the richest athletes make investments, but there are a lot of people. So there's a lot of stories where not the richest made a lot of money off of taking their professional athlete money and turning it into real wealth based on investment opportunities. So that's something we can talk about, because it's a fun topic to talk about too. So I think this one is kind of setting the stage for that. And, we'll see where the second conversation goes. But I think we've done a good job here. So what you can do is go check out our blog. It's Beyond Sports with Paul and Jeremy on Weebly. So just look us up, Beyond Sports on Weebly, and look at our blog, and you'll see this article and some other blog posts that we've made. All of our episodes should be up there too. Our episodes are also on Podbean. They're also on Apple Music, Spotify, Google, pretty much anywhere you can find podcasts. I've made sure that I put our podcast on pretty much everywhere.
Everywhere.
And like and review, get us up there, give us ratings, share the podcast, let other people know. If you like it, let your friends hear it. We just want to really open up the conversation. And what I want somebody from Canada to listen. We've got no listens from Canada. It's right there. I need some downloads from Canada. That's what I want. So anyway, I think that's everything. Like, share, review, check out our blog. Anything else, Paul?
Outside of that, I'm just interested to see who makes the Forbes list next year. Like we said, there's a lot of interesting competitors, especially with the NFL, especially since they're largely dominated by the signing bonuses. I'd like to see an NFL player on there with endorsements because that's definitely going to happen. But yeah, outside of that, like I'm glad that we did this show. It was interesting to kind of like look at, especially these big athletes that are making money, the brands that are actually endorsing them, and kind of like some of the trends that we've noticed. So, one of my favorite parts, I'll say, is you going back and thinking about just Tiger Woods, right? And thinking about how impactful his time of greatness was as a global phenomenon. And just, there's so much that's there. So I like that part. But I thank you again for bringing up this topic because it was very interesting, and I'm glad that we got to discuss it.
No problem. I'm glad to. I enjoyed it.
Sounds good. Well, with that said, this is Beyond Sports with Paul and Jeremy. I'm Paul.
I'm Jeremy.
Thank you guys for listening. We appreciate you.
All right. Thanks a lot.